Not every truck earns a legacy of toughness and dependability. Some become cautionary tales of what happens when poor engineering, outdated design, and bad decisions collide. In the world of commercial vehicles, performance, comfort, and reliability are everything. And when a truck fails in those areas, the consequences are costly and unforgettable. The 15 trucks on this list weren't just unpopular. They were deeply flawed machines that frustrated drivers, overwhelmed mechanics, and burned through fleet budgets with repairs and downtime. From punishing ride quality and cramped, noisy cabs to unreliable engines and electrical systems that seemed to fail at the worst moments, each of these models had serious shortcomings that the market simply couldn't overlook. While a few were initially seen as innovative or promising, they quickly fell behind as technology and expectations moved forward. Whether they were pulled quietly or met with industry-wide relief, these trucks were taken off the market not out of nostalgia or natural product cycles, but because they simply failed to meet the demands of real-world trucking. Number 15. The International Harvester Emoryville might carry nostalgic charm today, but during its working years, it was a frustrating and uncomfortable truck to operate. The cab-over design, while space-saving, resulted in a hot, noisy, and cramped cab with minimal insulation and ventilation. Drivers often left shifts exhausted and overheated. The driving position was awkward, the seats were stiff, and the steering felt vague and tiring over long distances. Mechanical reliability was hit or miss, with diesel engines prone to oil leaks, hard starts in cold weather, and overheating under load. Routine maintenance was a chore due to poor engine access and outdated components that wore quickly. Visibility, while better than some conventionals, was compromised by thick cab pillars and limited mirror coverage. As the trucking industry entered the 1970s, competitors like Kenworth and Peterbuilt introduced more comfortable, powerful, and serviceable models. Unable to evolve, the Emoryville saw plummeting sales and was pulled from production. It was taken off the market because it couldn't keep up with modern demands for comfort, reliability, and performance. Number 14. The International Fleetstar was built for durability, but it delivered a rough, outdated, and uncomfortable experience that wore drivers down. The cab was tight and noisy, with poor insulation that let in engine heat and road noise, making long shifts exhausting. Seating was stiff, the dash layout was clumsy, and visibility was limited by narrow windows and awkward mirror placement. The ride was harsh, especially when unloaded, and steering felt vague and tiring. Engine options were serviceable at first but became unreliable with age, suffering from oil leaks, weak performance, and hard cold starts. The braking system was outdated and electrical issues were common, especially in older units. Maintenance was frustrating due to cramped access to vital components and fragile wiring. As the 1970s progressed, competitors began offering more comfortable, efficient, and easier-to-service trucks. International couldn't keep up with evolving industry demands, and by the early 1980s, the Fleetstar was replaced by the more modern S-Series. It was taken off the market because it simply became too outdated to compete. Number 13. The Mack AB may have been functional in the early 1900s, but by any modern standard, it was a miserable machine to operate. Its solid rubber tires delivered a brutal ride, and the primitive leaf spring suspension did nothing to soften the blows. The cab offered no protection or comfort, open to the elements, with no insulation, heat, or proper seating, making every trip exhausting and unpleasant. The chain drive system, once seen as innovative, quickly became a maintenance nightmare, requiring constant attention and breaking down under strain. Its underpowered four-cylinder engine struggled with basic loads and overheated easily, while braking power was nearly non-existent. Controls were crude and required excessive physical effort, making operation difficult and fatiguing. As truck technology advanced rapidly in the 1920s and 1930s, with better tires, enclosed cabs, hydraulic brakes, and more powerful engines, the AB was left hopelessly behind. Mack discontinued it because it was simply too outdated, uncomfortable, and inefficient to survive in a modernizing transportation industry. Number 12. The International Loadstar may have been a fleet staple, but it was far from a pleasant or reliable truck to work with. The cab was cramped, noisy, and poorly insulated, making long shifts feel like endurance tests. Seating was uncomfortable, ventilation was weak, and the dashboard layout felt like an afterthought, with hard-to-read gauges and clunky switches. Ride quality was rough, and the manual steering was heavy and imprecise, especially in tight spaces. Gasoline engines were inefficient and underpowered, while diesel variants were plagued with cold start issues and sluggish performance. Brakes were outdated and required constant adjustment, and electrical systems often failed with age, leading to frequent downtime. Maintenance access was awkward, and even simple repairs could become time-consuming jobs. By the 1980s, competitors were offering more comfortable, efficient, and service-friendly trucks, making the Loadar look ancient. It was taken off the market and replaced by the S-Series because it simply couldn't meet the rising expectations of drivers or fleet managers. Number 11. The Ford LTL 9000 tried to compete in the heavy-duty segment with bold styling and a long-nosed design, but it fell short in key areas that mattered most to drivers and fleet operators. The cab, while spacious, suffered from poor ergonomics, cheap materials, and weak insulation that let in engine noise and heat, making long hauls tiring and uncomfortable. The ride quality was stiff, and the steering felt sluggish and heavy, especially when maneuvering at low speeds. While it offered decent engine options, reliability was inconsistent. Cooling issues, air system leaks, and electrical failures were common, leading to costly downtime. Maintenance was frustrating due to tight engine bay access and vulnerable wiring prone to corrosion. As the 1990s progressed, competitors offered more refined, efficient, and driver-friendly trucks, leaving the LTL 9000 looking outdated and inefficient. Ford, unable to keep pace in the Class 8 market, eventually exited the heavy truck business in the late 1990s. The LTL 9000 was taken off the market because it simply couldn't compete in a rapidly evolving industry. Number 10. The Sterling Actara was designed to be a versatile medium-duty truck, but it ended up delivering a frustrating mix of poor durability, awkward design, and constant reliability issues. The cab felt cheaply built, with rattling panels, thin insulation, and interior components that wore out far too quickly. The ride was harsh and unrefined, while the driving position was uncomfortable, with limited space and poorly placed controls. Many models were saddled with the troublesome Mercedes-Benz MBE engines, which were notorious for injector failures, EGR issues, and expensive maintenance that often sidelined trucks unexpectedly. Electrical problems and frequent fault codes plagued the dashboard systems, adding to driver frustration. Technicians found the engine bay tight and awkward to work on, increasing service time. As reliability concerns mounted and Daimler shifted focus to Freightliner, Sterling was discontinued entirely in 2009. The Actara was taken off the market because it failed to deliver the dependability and build quality needed in a competitive segment. Number 9. The Kenworth T600 was hailed as a game-changer when it debuted with its aerodynamic design, but over time, it proved to be far from perfect and eventually fell behind in a rapidly evolving industry. While its sloped hood and rounded lines improved fuel economy, they also introduced handling quirks. Poor visibility due to the aggressive nose slope made tight maneuvering frustrating, especially in urban settings. Inside, the cab felt cramped by modern standards, with limited headroom and dated ergonomics that made long hauls physically taxing. The ride quality was hit or miss depending on the suspension spec, but even on the best setups, the truck transmitted more road harshness than many of its competitors. Maintenance access was another sore point. The compact aerodynamic layout often meant cramped engine bays and frustrating service points. While early models ran solid mechanical gear, later T600s suffered from emissions-related issues tied to evolving EPA regulations, particularly with EGR and DPF systems, causing frequent downtime and expensive repairs. By the late 2000s, drivers and fleets were demanding more comfort, space, and integrated technology, and the T600's dated platform couldn't deliver. Kenworth pulled it from the lineup in 2007, replacing it with the T660, not as an evolution, but as an overdue response to years of mounting criticism and competitive pressure. The T600 faded out as a truck that once led, but ultimately failed to keep pace. Number 8. The Peterbilt 520 was intended to be a rugged, low-cab forward solution for demanding vocational roles like refuse collection, but in practice, it was plagued with issues that made it a constant source of frustration for operators and technicians alike. The cab-forward design offered great visibility on paper, but in reality, it came with tight, awkward ingress and cramped seating that left little room for driver comfort, especially during long shifts in stop-and-go environments. The interior was bare bones and noisy, with poor insulation and cheap-feeling materials that wore quickly under daily abuse. The electronics suite, meant to modernize the truck, was buggy and unreliable, with frequent failures in the digital instrument cluster and body control modules, leading to costly downtime. Powertrain options, including the Packer MX engines, suffered from chronic after-treatment issues. EGR, DPF, and SCR components constantly triggered fault codes, requiring repeated dealer visits and frustratingly expensive repairs. The truck's cooling system was often overwhelmed in urban, slow-speed operations, contributing to engine derates at the worst possible times. Ultimately, the 520 was taken off the market due to poor market performance and rising operational costs. Fleets simply lost patience. When better engineered alternatives from Mack and Autocar offered superior uptime and driver comfort, the 520 was quietly phased out, remembered more for its service headaches than its serviceability. Number 7. The International Transstar 4300 may have looked like a capable hauler in its day, but it was riddled with flaws that made it a tough sell, even back when expectations were lower. The boxy cab was cramped and loud, offering little in the way of driver comfort, with rock-hard seating, minimal insulation, and a dashboard layout that felt more like an afterthought than a well-designed workspace. The ride quality was punishing, especially on rough roads, and the steering felt loose and vague, requiring constant correction. Under the hood, the Detroit diesel and Cummins engines available in the 4300 were reliable in theory, but plagued by oil leaks, inconsistent cold starts, and excessive vibration, especially when aging components began to wear down. Maintenance was another weak point. Access to key systems was tight and awkward, making routine service tasks far more time-consuming than they needed to be. Electrical issues were common, and the air brake system was known for slow response and frequent leaks. As the 1980s rolled into the 1990s, the 4300's outdated design couldn't keep up with the more aerodynamic, efficient, and comfortable offerings from Kenworth, Freightliner, and Volvo. Eventually, International retired the 4300 to make room for the more modern and competitive 9000 series. The Transstar 4300 was taken off the market not because it aged gracefully, but because it simply couldn't survive the industry's leap forward. Number 6. The Navastar 7000 series was built to serve military and severe-duty roles, but despite its rugged appearance, it quickly gained a reputation for being more trouble than it was worth. The ride quality was brutally stiff, even by military standards, with a suspension that transferred every shock straight into the cab. Inside, the layout was Spartan and uncomfortable, offering little driver support during long missions or extended field use. Controls were clunky and dated, while visibility was limited by the blocky design and bulky armor kits. The biggest issue, however, was under the hood. Many 7000 series trucks were saddled with Navastar's disastrous MaxxForce engines, infamous for their unreliable EGR-only emission systems. These engines were prone to overheating, excessive soot buildup, power loss, and constant regeneration problems, all while avoiding the more reliable SCR, DEF technology adopted by competitors. This led to skyrocketing maintenance costs, vehicle downtime, and a loss of confidence from both domestic and foreign military clients. As Navastar's emissions strategy collapsed and legal battles mounted, the 7000 series became collateral damage. Procurement agencies moved on to more reliable platforms like the Oshkosh, FMTV, and international alternatives. Eventually, the 7000 series was taken off the market, not as a quiet phase-out, but as a retreat from a failed design and a failed engine gamble that cost Navastar dearly. Number 5. The REO M35, often dubbed the Deuce and a Half, may be remembered fondly by some for its long service life, but in reality it was an outdated, uncomfortable, and maintenance-heavy beast that overstayed its welcome. Designed in the late 1940s, its engineering reflected a bygone era. Manual everything, no power steering, and a non-synchronized transmission that required double clutching and brute strength to operate. The cab was brutally Spartan, with no insulation, poor ventilation, and seats that felt like thinly padded metal benches, making long drives exhausting and physically punishing. Ride quality was jarring thanks to stiff suspension and solid axles, and the truck's top speed barely exceeded 50 miles per hour, making it sluggish and frustrating on modern roads. The gasoline engines in early models were fuel-guzzling, underpowered relics prone to vapor lock, while later multi-fuel variants introduced a new layer of complexity and reliability concerns, especially as parts aged and maintenance demands increased. Braking performance was marginal at best, particularly when hauling loads in hilly terrain. As military logistics evolved, the M35's low payload-to-weight ratio, limited comfort, and constant upkeep made it increasingly impractical. Eventually, it was replaced by more modern, efficient platforms like the FMTV series. The M35 was taken off the market because it simply couldn't meet the demands of modern mobility. Too old, too slow, and too hard to keep running. Number 4. The Volvo VN770 was marketed as a premium long-haul truck with comfort and style. But beneath its sleek exterior, it struggled with serious flaws that left many drivers and fleets disappointed. The massive sleeper cab, while spacious, was prone to rattles and build quality inconsistencies that undermined its luxury image. Interior materials wore quickly, and despite the plush look, the ergonomics were awkward, especially the cramped footwell and oddly placed controls that made long drives more tiring than they should have been. The ride quality was soft to the point of feeling floaty and unstable over uneven roads, which many drivers found unsettling at highway speeds. The biggest issue, though, was reliability. The VN770 suffered from chronic electrical system failures, particularly in the cab harnesses and instrument clusters, leading to warning lights, sensor issues, and unpredictable shutdowns. Additionally, early emissions systems on models equipped with Volvo's own engines, like the D12 and D16, were plagued with EGR and DPF problems, causing downtime and high repair bills. Cooling systems were also underpowered for such a large truck, leading to overheating under heavy loads or hot conditions. As the trucking industry shifted toward lighter, more efficient designs with better reliability and lower operating costs, the VN770's size, weight, and mechanical headaches made it less appealing. Volvo eventually phased it out in favor of the more refined VNL series, quietly retiring the VN770 as a flawed flagship that didn't live up to its promise. Number 3. The Freightliner Argusy was supposed to modernize the cab-over concept, but instead it delivered a frustrating mix of design missteps, comfort issues, and long-term reliability problems that made it a tough sell in North America. The cab-over layout, while space-saving, meant a harsh ride, awkward cab access, and limited engine bay accessibility. Technicians often dreaded working on it due to tight, cramped service points. Inside, the cab felt dated almost from the start, with cheap plastic trim, thin insulation, and a boxy layout that didn't match the comfort levels of conventional trucks. Wind noise and vibration were constant companions at highway speeds, and early models were known for leaking seals, faulty HVAC systems, and electrical gremlins that made daily operation unpredictable. The wide dash looked modern, but often had failing gauges and glitchy electronics, especially in older units. Freightliner's use of various engines, including early emissions-era Detroit and Cummins models, introduced common issues with EGR valves, DPF clogging, and sensor malfunctions, leading to costly downtime. While the Argusy found niche use in global markets, it was never embraced in the US, where drivers favored conventional trucks for comfort, safety, and serviceability. Ultimately, shrinking demand, tough emissions regulations, and the declining popularity of cab-overs in North America led to the Argusy being discontinued, leaving behind a legacy of unrealized potential and frequent headaches. Number 2. The GMC Astro 95 looked futuristic when it hit the road in the 1960s, but behind its space-age styling was a deeply flawed truck that aged poorly and wore out its welcome with drivers and fleet owners alike. The cab-over design offered visibility, but came at the cost of a brutal ride, awkward cab entry, and limited engine access that turned maintenance into a grueling task. Inside, the cab was a noisy, poorly insulated box with stiff seats, cheap interior materials, and a dashboard that looked more like an aircraft panel than a practical truck layout. Gauges were scattered and hard to read, especially at night. The lack of creature comforts made long hauls exhausting, and vibrations from the driveline were relentless, especially in older units. Mechanical reliability was hit or miss. The Detroit diesel engines were loud, smoky, and prone to oil leaks, while the electrical systems were notorious for short circuits and failing components. The Astro 95 also suffered from poor rust protection, with corrosion eating away at cabs far too early in their service life. As the 1980s brought forward more refined, conventional trucks with better aerodynamics, quieter cabs, and easier maintenance, the Astro 95 felt like a dinosaur. GMC, already losing ground in the heavy-duty market, eventually withdrew from Class 8 truck production altogether. The Astro 95 was taken off the market not because it completed its mission, but because it simply couldn't evolve with the times. Number 1. The Ford CL9000 was Ford's ambitious attempt at a modern cab-over, but it quickly proved to be more frustrating than forward-thinking. While the tilting cab was innovative, it came with poor build quality. Rattles, panel flex, and water leaks were common even in relatively new trucks. The interior was a noisy, cramped affair with cheap materials, hard seats, and barely any insulation, making long-haul trips feel like endurance runs. Visibility was decent thanks to the cab-over layout, but the truck's heavy steering, vague handling, and stiff suspension made driving it physically exhausting. Engine options varied, but reliability was inconsistent, especially in later models saddled with emissions-era complexity or poorly integrated powertrain setups. Access to components might have looked easy thanks to the tilt cab, but in practice, maintenance was hampered by awkward cable routing and fragile connectors. Electrical issues and corrosion were also frequent complaints, particularly in wet or salted climates where the wiring harnesses and frame coatings didn't hold up. As the industry shifted toward more aerodynamic, comfortable, and efficient conventionals, the CL9000 became outdated overnight. Ford's lack of investment in its heavy-duty truck line, combined with declining sales and increasing competition from Freightliner, Kenworth, and Volvo, led to its quiet exit. The CL9000 was taken off the market because it simply couldn't compete, and Ford eventually left the heavy truck business entirely.